Hello, thank you everyone for joining us today for today's webinar, Compassion Fatigue. Today's presenter is Regina Romeo. For your convenience, the slide deck for today's presentation will be available on the CPS HR Consulting's website. Please visit cpshr.us/webinars to download. I posted that link as well into the chat, so you can just click on it immediately and favorite it. From there, the session will also be recorded. That will be available on the website as well. And we do have a number of other webinars coming up as our 30-minute series, which are 30-minute webinars every Friday at 11 o'clock. So please take a look at those. In order to ensure high quality recording, all attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have questions for Regina, please enter them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll address the questions at the end of the presentation or as time allows during the presentation. Now let's get started. Regina?
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everybody. I'm Regina Romeo. I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer for CPS HR Consulting. So today we're going to talk about compassion fatigue, which is something that you may or may not have heard of before, at least in the context of doing HR work or management or something else related to your job duties. So as Jason mentioned, if at any time you have questions or comments or anything, please feel free to type those into the chat. I tried to lean back a little bit so you guys don't get full forehead this morning for the presentation. So we'll go ahead and get started. So our agenda for this morning is going to be to define compassion fatigue and how it's different from exhaustion or burnout. Understand secondary trauma and how it affects HR specifically, and also discuss coping strategies and ways to combat compassion fatigue. So when we think about our snapshot, let's say, of our moment in time right now, we're dealing with a lot of stuff. Still under quarantine. You know, we're about to have our quarantine anniversary. The pandemic continues to be something that we all have to deal with on a daily basis. In addition to that, people are dealing with childcare issues. So if your school is shut down or your daycare facility is shut down, you're taking care of your children at home, which is another unexpected layer of stress. Protests are going on all the time for a lot of different things, for social justice, for different, rights for different groups. And so there's a lot that's coming at us all at once. Masks controversies, some people are maskers, some people are anti-maskers, some people have moments, like say, episodes when they're out in public with it. And we've seen a lot of people having outbursts and getting into altercations. Remote work. For some of us, that is, I was talking to somebody the other day, she was like, oh, I'd love to work from home. I'm like, that's not what you think it is, So when you're working from home and you can do some other things, then it's great. When you're at home working and you're living at home and you can't go anywhere else, it's a different type of engagement. The vaccine is rolling out, and whether you are able to get it or not, or you're on a waiting list, or you're waiting to see some of the efficacy results or the after effects and things like that, that's another thing that's on all of our minds. Mental health. Mental health is a huge consideration and just a big deal on any given day, but especially at the time that we're dealing with now. Homeschooling. So homeschooling is another thing where another unanticipated consequence of the pandemic and the quarantine. So some schools are open, some are not open, some are open part-time, some are open. There's a district around Sacramento where we are that's open for 2 different sessions, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, but not the same group of people. So there's a lot of back and forth. And of course, we just are coming on the heels of an election. We have a new administration. And so we're waiting to see results of that. So a lot of what we're dealing with aren't things that are new per se. Obviously, the pandemic is new for all of us in this lifetime, but we're not used to all of this happening at once. So we may have certain things that we individually have to deal with, but now we're dealing with what we're calling a collective trauma, where there's just so much coming at you all the time. It's all day, every day, and it's been going on for the last year. So when we start to talk about some of our stressors and anxiety and burnout and things like that, just keep in mind that it's okay not to be okay right now. I don't know anyone that I've spoken to personally or seen on TV or wherever that's thriving. I mean, unless you're, unless you own Amazon or Tesla, nobody's having a good time during this pandemic. So I wanted to touch on just a few mental health statistics. In any given year, 1 in 5 employed adults in the United States experiences a mental health issue. That includes depression, anxiety, and insomnia. So with everything that's going on, if you're feeling a little more depressed than usual, a little more anxious than usual, or you can't sleep, or you're oversleeping, it's completely expected as far as I'm concerned, because it's just so much. Only 57% of employees who report moderate depression and 40% of those who report severe depression receive treatment to control their depressive symptoms. So even though we talk a lot about mental health and we talk about services and make sure you're taking care of yourself and those types of things, there's still a lot of stigma around mental health issues. There's still a lot of, you know, shame that people have about feeling depressed and not being able to do the things that they normally do. But again, this isn't normal times. And when we look at these statistics, keep in mind, these are pre-pandemic statistics. So the latest that I've heard is that really it's more like 1 in 3 people are experiencing depressive episodes. Mental health issues can be present without visible symptoms. So when we think about what does a person who has depression look like? There's that commercial, or you see different things online about what depression looks like. And people think that it's, oh, I can't get out of bed and I can't shower and I haven't eaten. But there are a lot of people who deal with depression and anxiety and other mental health issues that show up for work every day, fully dressed. They do their work, but they're still dealing with depression. They're still dealing with anxiety. So there's not really anything that is indicative always from a visible perspective where you can look and see that somebody's depressed. Obviously that does happen sometimes, but keep in mind there are people dealing with those types of things that aren't necessarily what you might think, what you might think that they would look like. You're more likely to experience mental illness than you are to develop heart disease, diabetes, or any kind of cancer. And when we talk about diabetes and cancer and things like that, we have a little more compassion for people. When we talk about some mental health issues, we're a lot less understanding sometimes, and it's again stigmatized sometimes with how we treat someone that we know is dealing with a mental health issue, or just cheer up. For somebody that's depressed, it's just not that simple. So keeping in mind that we may all experience a lot of these things, especially during this time, just as a way to keep us aware. You don't have to have a pre-existing condition to have a mental health episode. So you may not have ever been diagnosed with depression or anxiety or stressors. But again, with everything that's been coming at people for the last year, it just wouldn't be surprising. You can experience the onset of a new condition during this pandemic, or you can, have it exacerbated by the quarantine if you have an existing condition. So there's just a lot going on. There's a lot of people who are just trying to make it through the day. And it's really about understanding what's going on within ourselves and also what's going on with folks around us. So when it comes to talking about what is compassion fatigue is something that I heard of a few years ago. And it was interesting to me because I heard about it in a different context. So it's basically terminology that's used in the healthcare industry and the animal care industry. And in my previous life, I was the human resources director for the Department of Animal Care and Control in Los Angeles. And they have an annual conference. There is such thing as an animal control conference. One's in Long Beach and one's in Sacramento, and they alternate years. So one of the sessions that I went to was called Compassion Fatigue. And what the person was talking about was the associated trauma in the medical field dealing with patients in emergency long-term care or hospice care, or animals that are basically in the same situation. So someone who can't take care of themselves or an animal that obviously can't take care of itself, and how the people who are the caregivers are affected by that trauma that they see every day. The associated trauma in the animal care field is dealing with euthanasia, which is never anything pleasant, regardless of the circumstances. In our in our department, we dealt with a lot of animal cruelty cases. So those, stories that you hear about when someone is hoarding animals or somebody's breeding animals and they're doing it in an unethical way, our department responded to that. When we had animal attacks. Right before I started working there, there was a situation in North County in Los Angeles where a woman was mauled by a pack of dogs, of wild dogs. And we also respond to emergencies. So when you see on TV, and that's something I didn't even really think about before I worked there, when you see on TV, Los Angeles is having a wildfire, or they're having a mudslide, or they're having something else that's going on, our department would respond as well as police and fire and whatever. So we would have to set up kind of like mobile shelters for animals, because when you have to evacuate, your animals have to go somewhere and they can't really go to the shelter with you. So we would set up mobile shelters at fairgrounds or at high schools or wherever had a big enough, enough real estate to accommodate all the animals in the area. But seeing those types of things day after day really takes its toll on people. Because I think sometimes when people think animal care industry, I remember before I first went to work there, people were saying, oh, you're not going to have any problems over there. It's just, a lot of people coming in to get puppies and kittens and stuff like that. And that's a part of it. But there's also a large part of it that is grisly. That's just, there's just a lot of things that you have to see, and thinking about how the people who have to respond to those things, the toll that it takes on them is really where that fatigue kind of sets in. So you'll see a large body of work that's associated with medical and animal care. People who are obviously in hospice care, who are at the end of life, or people who need special medical attention. You'll see a lot of that for the nurses, the doctors, the staff that take care of those patients, as well as animal care, like I mentioned before. And it's really only recently that there's some new parallels within the HR profession, because I remember thinking when I was listening to the seminar that I went to, I was thinking, because I would always joke, I work in animal care, but I take care of our two-legged animals as an HR person. But there were so many parallels between having to care for people that are dealing with their real life issues and the toll that I felt that it was taking on me, but I never really had a word or a term for it. So it was very enlightening. So basically, compassion fatigue is a state experienced by those helping people or animals in distress. It's an extreme state of tension and preoccupation with the suffering of those being helped. And I'm looking around my camera gooseneck, if you're wondering, to the degree that it can create a secondary traumatic experience for the helper. And that's how Charles Figley defines compassion fatigue. And he's one of the foremost authorities on the subject. And what that means is a secondary trauma is a few different things. So it's basically certain circumstances that can cause you to be more susceptible to secondary trauma stress, such as personal exposure to a traumatic event, or to individuals who are coping with their own reactions to trauma. So in HR, when you have an employee who is dealing with their own medical issue, they're dealing with their own financial issue, they're dealing with their own domestic issue, they bring that to us to discuss a lot of the times. And so it's basically having direct contact with traumatic stories. So we've probably all experienced someone in our workplace who has contracted a chronic illness, or someone who has lost someone close to them, a parent, a child, a spouse, or whatever. And it's just traumatic. There's not really any other way to say it. And depending on how much involvement you have and how much employee contact you have, it starts to build, and it can really, again, just kind of take its toll on you. So compassion fatigue and secondary trauma are when you are helping others but neglecting yourself. So when we hear these stories, you want to be there for the employee. You want to be a resource for the employee. You either want them to talk to you want to direct them to EAP, you want to work with their supervisor to get them time off or to get them whatever type of an accommodation that they need. But it's a lot, it's a lot of emotion that is involved in that. And it can be a traumatic experience if it's something that you've also experienced. So Dr. Figley also says, and I have to move my camera a little bit, sorry. We have not been directly exposed to the trauma scene, but we hear the story told with such intensity, or we hear similar stories so often that, and we have the gift and curse of extreme empathy, and we suffer. And I expect everybody who works in HR has, empathy. We feel the feelings of our clients. We experience their fears, we dream their dreams. Eventually, we lose a certain spark of optimism, humor, and hope. We basically tire. We aren't sick, but we aren't ourselves. And so, like I mentioned before, I know for myself that I've experienced that, but there wasn't a term for it. It's like, well, what is this even called when you just feel completely just listless, when your energy and the spark that you have for doing your job and being there for people somehow finds its way out the door. So compassion fatigue, in short, is basically the cost of caring. So we want, obviously, our people who are taking care of others to be compassionate and to be empathetic and sympathetic and to care for everyone else. But we also need to understand what the parameters of that look like. So we'll talk a little bit more about awareness in a moment, but really just getting to the point where I felt, oh, wow, like, wow, this makes perfect sense for me. And then relating it to what I do for a living, because I've been in human resources for over 20 years, I'll just say that. And so understanding the how and why things take its, have a cumulative effect on you, or why some certain events are triggering for you, was just very enlightening for me. So basically, compassion fatigue is the fundamental trap that causes, Terry Bogue says, the fundamental trap that causes compassion fatigue is a focus on other people and their needs before focusing on your own self-care needs. It's easy to forego the activities that bring you happiness. Without capacity flowing back in, eventually you run yourself ragged, identifying too closely with those suffering and have nothing left to give. And that's the point where compassion fatigue sets in, and you'll pardon my camera issues here. But it's when you run out, when the cupboards are bare, when you've exhausted yourself. But the problem is that you still have to go back to work the next day, or you still have to have that meeting, in the afternoon, and you still have to do all the things that you're expected to do, in addition to dealing with how you're personally feeling about certain things. So what we need to think about is redefining organizational care. First and foremost, we're human, we're also employees. And we, again, talk about how our employees need to be cared for, but we are also a part of that group. And so when it comes to the care that we need as caregivers, it's a little bit different, because there's usually this separation where it's like, okay, well, HR is going to take care of this, or they're going to do that. And it's like, okay, well, what about when HR needs, somewhere to go as well? So we deal with employees that are literally dealing with life and death situations, domestic violence situations, workplace violence, health issues, and a long list of other challenges are what come in our front door, in addition to our regular HR work. So our regular HR work, it's like you're dealing with someone who, like, I had an employee whose ex-girlfriend, let's say, showed up at work and basically papered his whole front windshield with Post-its, and had handwritten little things saying notes or whatever on each Post-it, put it on his thing, and then she came into the building. So we had to call the police, we had to have her escorted out, and then a couple weeks later, she came back again. So it's like you're dealing with that, and you're trying to make that employee safe. And so we had to move him to another location so that his car wasn't out in the parking lot. And then she stopped coming to that office. But there's only so many offices that we had to choose from. And you're dealing with that. But wait, I also have to do this recruitment, and I also have to onboard this, new hire, and I also have to worry about open enrollment. So there's a lot of things that we have to do that are, routine HR stuff, and then the other unexpected stuff that pops up that we also have to deal with in that same moment. So when we think about the what I call the HR ecosystem and everything that goes on when it comes to dealing just with our day to day, you have your planned stuff, and I learned very early in HR that there's no such thing as a normal day. It's like, what's a normal day look like for you? And it's like, I haven't had a normal day since Reagan was in office. So who knows? But there's just a lot of things that go on that you have to deal with within that time. And just being mindful within each situation of how you can best deal with it is what becomes important. So all of these, again, situations are in addition to our daily operational tasks. So don't feel like, okay, well, oh man, I couldn't get to this because I was doing this other thing. We deal with a lot of emergencies. We do a lot of, frontline response. We deal a lot with things that just pop up out of nowhere that you absolutely would have never anticipated when you were brushing your teeth to come to work that morning. So it's not about having to take everything on, but dealing with what you need to deal with, but also make sure that you're not, overtaxing yourself. Basically, when there's constant empathy and sympathy, it has a cumulative effect. So it may be, cool on that first day, but like I said in, the example with the lady was popping up all the time, she just kept coming back, and it was like, how many times do we have to call the police? And it just takes on, it just snowballs sometimes. Something that starts out either high and gets higher, or starts out small and just immediately jumps to a higher level. We're expected to respond. People ask me when I talk about compassion fatigue, well, isn't this just burnout? Isn't just everybody just suffering? And it's partially burnout. That's a part of it. The difference is that burnout usually has a slower onset. Like, you don't just immediately get burnt out just on one day. It's usually something that builds up over the course of time, and it has, let's just say, a longer runway to when you're feeling burnt out, or what we define as burnout. And burnout is not necessarily trauma related. It can be a heavy workload. If it's a certain time of year when you're busier than others, then you're going to feel and experience some burnout. It's feeling like you're not getting the job done. There's been many times when either I'll go to work on Monday morning, and then the next thing you know, it's Friday afternoon, and it's like, well, where did the week go? What just happened? I don't even remember anything that happened that week. I don't remember if I was effectively doing things. I'm sure I made all my meetings, or I would have heard about it, but everything just starts to blur, so you start to feel really burnt out. And especially during the pandemic, where your work life is your home life and you're not physically going into an office, it gets more difficult to separate those two things. With compassion fatigue, it is a little bit different because you can have a more immediate onset. So there are certain things that I know will be a triggering event for me, where it's just kind of like the minute that I hear about something, I'm like, and it was just like that needle scratch on a record where it's like, what just happened? And now I have to go deal with that. So I need to understand how I'm personally affected. Compassion fatigue is also when your ability to care is taxed to depletion, and you just feel overwhelmed. So even though I've been in HR for forever, there are days where I'm just like, wow, this is a lot today. I would say, for myself, and probably for all of us that deal with people on the people side of things, this last year has been easily the hardest year of my entire career, just because there's just so much to deal with, and you don't have a chance to catch your breath. You don't have a chance to just pause and say, okay, good. That's over, before something else crazy starts happening. And right when you think it's over, it's really not. So when you're dealing with a lot of the trauma that you see, and then you're dealing with the secondary trauma that people are bringing to you, it's just a very difficult time, so it's important that we are more vocal about how we're feeling, that we're more engaged with what we are thinking and feeling, in order to continue to be able to show up at work, be able to show up for ourselves first and foremost, for our friends, for our family, and other people that depend on us. It's really difficult when there's the expectation that you have to be emotionally available all the time. So I know for me in the last year, I would say one of the things that I've changed is that no matter what day or night, time of day or night it is, I always answer my phone. Not that I didn't answer it before, but you know how you get a phone call and you look at it and you're like, I could call that person back. That's fine. But I don't know what that person on the other end of the line is dealing with. And I know I would feel some type of way if I was trying to reach out to someone and I didn't get that response and you don't know where they are in their situation. So I try to make a point to always answer my phone. But what I was finding is that I was getting phone calls all hours of the night. I'm getting emails and things all hours of the night of things that were non-emergencies, but to me that just said that that person needed somebody to listen, to talk to hear them out. And in as much as maybe that's not my first choice, I definitely want to be there to be responsive, because it's such a weird time. It's just, I don't know. There's not even really another way to categorize it. And I may be that last person's phone call, or I may be the only person that they're reaching out to. So I definitely wanted to be there, but I knew what my limits were. And I never felt like, okay, well, gosh, now I got to answer the phone. It's like, I'm happy to answer the phone if somebody is taking their time to reach out, because I know how difficult that is sometimes. The difference between there are some parallels between, I should say, compassion fatigue and burnout. It's basically the emotional exhaustion and the negativity and the irritation that come with both. And I know when I'm getting to that moment, where it's just kind of like, oh, if I hear this person's voice one more time, or this person calls me. And sometimes I'm irritated at, you start work at 8, I'm irritated by 8:13, and that's not my fault, right? We all have our moments, but that's a sign. That's a sign where it's just like, first of all, I need to calm down. Okay, this person didn't do anything to me. Let me try to breathe through this or take a beat before I re-engage in work today. When you have a reduced sense of personal accomplishment or meaning in your work. So there are times when we'll be just going through the motions. You're just going through the day to get through the day. And that's okay, because you can't be, there's not a tiger in your tank every day. You're not going to come in, you're not even coming in the door anymore. You're literally going down the hall or going downstairs to go to work. So that tends to drag you a little bit. Decreased interaction with others or isolation. And this is such a big deal right now, because it's very easy for us to fade into the background, for our employees to fade into the background, our peers and coworkers and other people to just isolate themselves. And it's difficult to notice. You would notice if somebody wasn't at work in our physical space all the time, but sometimes in the virtual space, it's like, oh, I haven't heard from so-and-so, or this person, doesn't seem as engaged in our meetings, or is not being responsive, or whatever. And it's really a time where that person may be dealing with some type of fatigue or burnout that we can do a little outreach. There's times when I, over the last year, where I'm like, wow, the garbage goes out more than I do, because I was just, sitting in my house by myself a lot of times. And then you kind of have to snap yourself out of it, or somebody will say, well, I haven't heard from you in a couple days, is everything cool? And it's just like, oh yeah, that's right, there's people. Depersonalization is another thing that kind of crosses over to both, where you are disconnected. The symptoms cause you to disconnect from the real causes, where you're really mad about something over here, but you're taking it out over there. So it's kind of, this misplaced anxiety and anger that you have to deal with, and your physical or mental exhaustion. So like I mentioned earlier, the way that this shows up in our space with depression and anxiety is fatigue a lot of times. Just physically being tired, mentally being tired, being unable to focus, being unable to be responsive. I was talking to a friend the other day, and I had my own eye doctor appointment as well, and they said that they see an increase in things like dry eye syndrome because of the increased screen time, and that causes you to feel tired also. So get yourself some fake tears, just a little pro tip for you. But those types of things that manifest themselves in a physical way, I've handled a lot of cases for workers' comp for stress over the years, but I've also seen a lot of more extreme cases, I would say definitely over the last couple of years, where people are younger and younger, and they're having strokes, or they're having some type of cardiac situation, or they're having hypertension, and things that think would happen to somebody who's not healthy or somebody who's later in life or whatever, it's popping up in people younger and younger. So we really need to be mindful of what our bodies are trying to tell us when they're trying to tell it to us. People also ask me, well, is this just something that every manager gets? And yeah, a manager of any type can have compassion fatigue, obviously, because you care about your employees. But a manager is only responsible for their direct reports. So if you're talking about someone who manages a group, then they're responsible for those folks. For HR, we're responsible for the whole organization. So regardless of who you work for, you can come to me with your issues, and I will help you resolve them as best I can. So we become the caregivers for our organizations, our first responders, frontline workers. We're a resource for everybody, not just the people who are currently working there, but also people who are candidates we deal with. If somebody needs an accommodation to take an exam, for example, we deal with that. And also for people who used to work here. So whether they left voluntarily or not, we deal with our current and former employees. So it's a long list of folks that are going to be knocking on our door. And when you are a manager that's not in HR, a lot of times it's like, well, you need to take that to HR, and we don't have anywhere else to send that person, so we definitely have to deal with it. So it's a different type of engagement that comes, and again, that's part of the job, and that's kind of the part that I love, is just being able to help people. But the volume of people, depending on what you're dealing with, is also something to take into consideration, depending on the size of your organization. So Jason, do we have any questions, comments, or anything before I get into our coping strategies? If you're talking, you're muted, so I'll just take that as a no. Okay, so coping strategies are going to be awareness, setting boundaries, creating a support system, and also self-care. So these are kind of the cornerstones of combating compassion fatigue. And the first thing, as I've mentioned a few times, is awareness. So it's very important that you just know that it even exists, and that you are able to recognize those symptoms in yourself and others. So you have to think about what types of situations contribute to your stress level, increasing your vulnerability to compassion fatigue. So being a chief human resources officer is what I call my job. That's my day job. But I also work as an expert witness in labor law cases, which is one of my other jobs. And there are just certain cases that I absolutely will not take because they're triggering for me. I just know that they're going to be either too much drama, too much work, too much reading, or it's just going to be too heavy of a topic. So I avoid those completely. But I have the luxury to do that in my second job, not so much in my primary job. So I have to think of events or situations that cause me to experience an unusually strong reaction, and often overpowers my normal coping mechanisms when it comes to day-to-day work. So for whatever the reasons, personal reasons, professional reasons, or whatever, there are certain things that I try to avoid in the workplace. There are things that I try to make sure they get resolved at the lowest level possible because they're difficult for me to deal with. Anything that involves any type of workplace violence or, domestic violence, it's not my first choice, obviously. I've been through a lot of situations at work. The last week that I worked for the court system in Los Angeles, for example, we had a bomb threat, and they locked us down for about 12 hours, and you can't leave the building. You can't go by the window. You couldn't pick up the phone. This was back when landlines were a thing, when the cell phones were first becoming whatever, because you didn't know what was happening. And so things that get kind of that chaotic, when I have to deal with that, and I have to read people's accounts of it as an expert, I'm like, no, I think I'm okay. I'm gonna leave that alone. But again, during the day, during any other situation, I don't have the ability to do that. But I know that if I start to have a reaction afterward, or it starts to feel a little bit differently, I know what that's about. So it's really, again, about awareness. When your ability to function is interfered with or altered, where you have a coping strategy, but something gets in the way of it, or you're not as equipped as you thought you were to deal with whatever the situation is, that's when you are, again, having to be aware of what's happening to you. If there's a situation or incident that doesn't seem typical or ordinary, it feels traumatic. Again, being, in the middle of a lockdown for a bomb threat, not ordinary, luckily, not typical, luckily. They haven't had to do that since, but it's, who knows? I mean, we hear stories all the time about people who are terminated and they come back a week later, and you have an active shooter situation. So you can be expected to have a strong reaction to that. So keep those things in mind as you go through your day and what is typical versus atypical and how you're reacting to it. Regularly waking up in the morning tired and struggling to get to work. And I think about now where it's just like, I'm tired every day. But my home office is maybe 30 feet from, my bedroom. It's like right down the hall. But even some days that 30 feet was a struggle, just getting and sitting in front of the computer where it's just like, and that's when I know, okay, I need a moment. I need to take some time off. I need to step away, or I need to do whatever to basically take care of myself, because again, your body's going to tell you what is going on. Becoming frustrated and irritated easily. It happens. I can count maybe, I'm gonna go the over under. I'd say less than 10 times in my career, but it happens where I've just, that's it. It's the middle of the day, something happens, and I just can't. So I would just shut down my computer, get my purse, and tell my, manager, I need a moment. I can't today. And that's okay, because what would happen if I stayed for the rest of the day would be anybody's guess, so I can't be held accountable for my actions if I know that I've already, reached my limit. If you're feeling as if you're working harder but accomplishing less, that's another sign to be, to have some awareness where it's just like I'm working and working and working, but I don't feel like I'm finishing anything or I'm accomplishing anything or anything's getting done, or my to-do list is just as long as it was, a week ago. When you start losing compassion for some people while becoming overly involved in others, it's very easy to brush something off, that's a concern that somebody brings you because you're unable to deal with it yourself. Your resources have been exhausted. You don't have anything else to give. That's a moment when you need to be aware, or you're experiencing illness and aches and pains, and some of that comes, just being human. We're not built to last forever, but again, your body will tell you what needs to happen. So for me, I hadn't gone to the doctor since, I don't even know. And then over the last few months, I've been going to the doctor. I got my blood work done, and of course, you haven't been monitoring it, you haven't been looking at it. Everything that was low was supposed to be high. Everything that was high was supposed to be low. And so you raise your awareness about those things. It's easy to ignore it. It's easy to just not go to the doctor. And even if you are feeling tired or achy or whatever, you just chalk it up to, well, that's just pandemic life, or that's just whatever. But the number one killer is heart disease. And they call it, they call hypertension and high blood pressure the silent killer, because your first sign that you have a problem is a heart attack. And then you may or may not survive that heart attack. So be mindful of those things. And even if you are feeling okay, go confirm that anyway. Go to the doctor, have the doctor give you a professional opinion that you're feeling okay, or that your body's functioning okay. Setting boundaries is another coping mechanism. Setting emotional boundaries helps maintain a connection while still remembering and honoring the fact that you're a separate person with your own needs. So, of course, we all want to do our best for our organization, for the people that depend on us, but we're only human also. So setting boundaries becomes very important when dealing with so much in a day. Boundaries are limits that people set in order to create a healthy sense of personal space. And it's not just the physical boundaries, but they can also be the emotional boundaries. And they help distinguish the desires, needs, and preferences of a person from another. So, like, for example, when we were back in our physical spaces, when I would go into work, I don't like when somebody comes in and I haven't even put my purse down yet, where it's just kind of like, oh, Regina, I need blah, blah, blah. And it's just kind of like, okay, well, if we could just give me a moment to put my keys away, we can get into whatever it is that you want to talk about. That's fine. Or it's like, oh, we got to have a meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, really? What are we talking about at 8 that we can't talk about at 10? So it's understanding where your limits are. And like I love having meetings, at 3 and 4 in the afternoon. Everybody else hates that. My CEO is I always joke with him that he turns into a pumpkin at 4:30 because he's very much into whatever at 7 and 7:30 in the morning. So I'm not that person who's like, okay, let's get up at, the crack of dawn and talk about whatever. But we deal with people coast to coast. So sometimes the time difference, I have to do that, but it's not my regular course. So I try to just push it back just a little bit because I know how I function best, which is, I've always been a night owl. So first thing in the morning, it's kind of like, not so much. When you identify behaviors from others that are acceptable and unacceptable, that's another way to set a boundary. So there are some things where I'm like, oh no, that's cool. And then there are just some other things that people say and do where I'm like, file that under, no, ma'am, that is not acceptable. We are not doing that. And you have to be vocal about that. You have to not put somebody on blast in the middle of a meeting, but after the meeting, just say, when such and such happened, that's really not my get down. That's really not, how I vibe with people. So in the future, it would be nice if you did, such and such, or if we engaged in such and such a way, because you want to be obviously professional and respectful, but you also don't want the same situation to keep happening. So sometimes setting a boundary doesn't mean that somebody's going to respect it. You could tell people, whatever it is that you're feeling, but it's really up to them whether or not they're going to respect it. And it's really up to you whether or not you're going to tolerate that. So sometimes boundaries have to be communicated assertively and openly. And repeated as needed. So it's just kind of like, if you'll recall, we had a conversation a couple weeks ago about such and such, and I was just, wanted to remind you that, we had agreed to do, X, Y, and Z. So there's a way to talk to people that's very tactful. Obviously, I'll save my angst about it and when I want to talk mess about something for after hours. But in the workplace, you want to maintain that professionalism. And that kind of changes throughout your career. I remember when I was a baby HR professional, and I was social media before there was social media. Like I was like in talking to everybody about everything and, oh, what happened with this, running around and checking everybody's temperature and what's going on and whatever. Now, not so much. Not so much. Father time is undefeated, and it slows you down a little bit. You start to think about what's important and what's not in terms of where you place your energy. And so for me, now when somebody comes and they start telling me, okay, so what happened? I'm like, no, don't tell me. It's better if you don't tell me, unless I absolutely have to know. Because if you tell me, then I'm going to have to do a certain thing. So if it's something that's just not new, if I could get away with not knowing something, I'm cool. Create a support system. A support system has really been what has gotten me through this pandemic. First of all, be your own advocate. Who cares for the caregiver is really starts with ourselves. So I have a lot of people say, oh, well, I need some time off, or I need a mental health day, or I need a whatever. Then take it. The reality is nobody's going to do your work while you're gone. So that work is going to be here when you get back. So if you are feeling like you need a moment or whatever, take that moment. Acknowledge the emotional toll of your role in the organization. Nobody wants to do our jobs. Nobody's going to be like, you know what, Regina's not here today. Let me go take something off of her desk, or let me respond to this email for her. Let me, clear up this project. But no, that has never happened. Nobody wants to do that for anybody else. So when you understand that your role in the organization is not just tasks, but it's also the emotions and the sympathy and the empathy and the compassion and everything else that comes with working in HR, you'll be able to understand, okay, I need a moment right now. Allow yourself some post-action time to decompress when something happens. And this is really important. or when I have to do something that's unsavory. Let's just say we have to have a hearing or you have to do a termination or something like that. Nobody's having a good time in that transaction. There's not like, oh, yeah, I get to do a termination today. It's very taxing. I mean, I will say I've never terminated or disciplined anybody that didn't deserve it, but that's not really the point. It still takes a toll on you. And then, I can't do a termination at, 11:30 in the morning and then go right back to worrying about open enrollment at 1 o'clock. So it's a moment that I need. I might, need to step away for a minute or take the rest of the day or whatever. If you're going to a hearing, you're involved in a lawsuit, you have to give a deposition or whatever the situation is that we deal with. Or there's something else, when you have I've had, two of our clients who've lost employees lately, where one of their employees passed away, suddenly. And it's just kind of like, what does the rest of the day even look like after that? You need the rest of the day. There's just no focus that you can find when something that's that big happens. And so ask for the help and the resources that you need. Don't suffer in silence. Pro tip, if you take nothing else away from this, definitely think about how you need to be taken care of. And nobody's going to know that unless you tell them. Reach out through your online networks and groups. I found that there's, a lot of forums and listservs and things that are always talking about ways that we can take care of ourselves, and they're there to provide, just good advice and listen to somebody complain anonymously or personally. Talk through your stressors with your peers, your friends, and your family, whether they want to hear it or not. So I used to, when I lived in LA, I took public transportation, and on any given day, I might just talk to a stranger on the train and tell them, you're not going to believe what happened today. So, all the way from downtown LA to Long Beach, I would say, yeah, so then what happened was, but it's a way to get it out of your system. So whoever will listen, it doesn't necessarily have to be, somebody you've known for years. Strangers love a good story. I discovered, have regular check-ins and conversations with your leadership team. Let your managers and your administrators and your supervisor know, yeah, I'm all right. Things have calmed down a little bit, or things are kicking up a little bit, and I might need to manage my time a little bit differently, or whatever the situation is. But remember, the advocacy is for you also. Stay realistic about what you can and can't do. There's only so many hours in the day, and you need to be available those hours. And you also need to be well, in those hours, and not feel like, okay, well, I know I'm not well, but I need to, push through and, do whatever, because that's just a recipe for disaster. And delegate as much as you can. People are usually willing to help you, they're not going to take all your work away from you, but it's like, what, if you could just help me with this, or you could just go to this meeting on my behalf, and then just debrief me later. There are a lot of ways to do that will keep you, just kind of, just doing just enough to get through the day. Self-care is basically the last coping strategy. And self-care is when it's needed when you overuse your compassion without taking time to regularly being the operative word, recharge. Your ability to feel and care for others becomes worn down. So when we think about self-care, it's like, oh yeah, let's just go and work 60 hours a week and then take, 2 little days to bounce back and then get up and do it all over again the next week. And that's not really self-care. Self-care is different for everyone. And self-care is also something that you should be doing daily. So whether it's something that you're taking 5 minutes to do, you're taking 10 minutes to do in the morning, in the evening, in the midday, or whatever, it's when you're just strictly focused on yourself and your own well-being. I don't meditate, but I do things that are meditative. But meditation, deep breathing, just sitting in a dark room or sitting in a quiet room or something like that for a few minutes to just turn all the noise off. Don't try to do what I call supply side self-care. So if you're familiar with supply side economics, it's basically the premise that if you just keep producing, then you'll get ahead and everything will just work itself out. Humans aren't built to work like that. That works in production and machinery and other things that can break down and be fixed. But when we break down, the fix is not that easy. And you can have some really bad long-term effects from living in that stressful space all the time. Avoid what I call the pandemic performance pressure, where it's like, oh, now that we're in a pandemic and you have all this time and you should be learning another language and playing an instrument and working on your summer body. And it's like, I will say that I am taking Spanish lessons. That was a choice. But I haven't played my clarinet in years and I have no desire to do that. And this summer is going to get the body that I give it. So I don't want to encourage anybody to do more than what they can. If you feel like you have the energy to go do something and it feels good to you, then absolutely do it. But don't feel like, oh, my neighbor's doing this or my brother-in-law is doing that, so I got to get up and go do whatever, because you don't. Nurture yourself by putting activities in your schedule that are sources of pleasure and joy and diversion and, fun stuff. You going outside, walking your dog, talking to somebody, reading a book, or just not doing anything at all. We are probably, the most overscheduled workers in the history of work, where it's just like we have to be doing something all the time. And sometimes, I'll just say, I'm just going to take the day off. Oh, I'm going to be out of cell phone range, so my phone's not going to be working. Now, out of cell phone range might mean I'm in my living room watching the same episode of Law & Order SVU that I've seen 47 times already. But sometimes the only thing to make you feel better, or the only thing that makes me feel better, is something that's, especially heinous. So I will watch Law & Order for the next, 10 hours, and then I just feel better. What you want to avoid is ignoring signs of stress, fatigue, or burnout. Again, your first sign of heart problems is a heart attack, and here today, gone tomorrow is not how you want to approach things. If you can do something to intervene before that happens. Avoid working harder and longer. Again, don't feel like, okay, well, if I just work another X amount of hours, then I'll get ahead, because that's just never going to happen. There's just not. I haven't been caught up on work probably since like first grade. Anything that I've done, there's always a backlog, and I embrace that backlog. There's always going to be something that can be done differently. Avoid self-medicating unless it's prescribed by a doctor. You all know what I'm talking about. That can be a rabbit hole. Avoid neglecting your own needs and interests. It's very easy to get caught up in what the expectation is that other people have of you, or that your job demands, or your family demands, or your friends demand. And to the point, if it's at the point where you're only doing things for other people, that's also not a way to live. Feeling shame or guilt for resting. When I say, okay, when I'm going to take, Friday off, or I need, another couple of days or whatever, it's like, are you sick? Are you okay? I'm not sick, but I'm not well either, and I don't want to deal with work today, and that's okay. And there's usually a lot of people who are like, oh, you're taking a day off? Why? Because I need a day off. We all need a day off. When it's a holiday, we're all off, so it's not the same as being off when somebody else is working. So it doesn't have the same appeal. It's like, well, everybody's off. That means nobody's working. But when I'm at home, or I get to take a little moment for myself, and then other people are doing work, I'm like, okay, I feel like I'm really getting away from something. So embrace a time every day for your self-care routine, for taking care and taking a moment for yourself to get a breather. And it doesn't have to be hours and hours, but it could just be a moment. I take usually a midday break just to sit down, and I just lean my head back for a few minutes, and it's like, all right, I'm all right. Get something cold to drink, or something hot to drink, or whatever. Celebrate your small wins. And I remember the first time I heard this, I just thought it was the corniest thing in the world, but then I was like, oh wait, that makes sense. I use what I call my dishwasher standard. So let's just say that during this pandemic, there's been several times when the dishes just pile up, and I don't know who does it, because I live alone. It's the weirdest thing. And I didn't have the energy or the focus or whatever to even load the dishwasher and run it, and then the whole cycle. So now a small win for me is just getting the dishwasher loaded, getting the dishwasher unloaded. Those little things where I'm like, okay, I did something today. I feel better about that. Do something meditative. Like for me, I am a big crafter. I do a lot of arts and crafts. I do a lot of baking. Well, I take that back. I only bake cupcakes. I don't bake like bread and cakes and stuff, because that's not me. I just do cupcakes. But that that's meditative for me. That allows me to feel like I accomplished something. So I spent the last, year, started a little side business, making cupcakes for people. Got a lot of the tools and things, and I won't show you my sprinkle collection because you'll judge. But um, it's I've always loved doing that. So just being able to have a creative outlet is a big deal for me. We need to redefine rest and recovery. Rest is when you're proactively taking that time, and this is the time that I'm giving myself, versus recovery, which is usually like the weekend where you were on 10 all week, and then you try to again recover in that the 2 days that you're given. And it's usually not a restful 2 days because there's so many things that you have to do that you didn't have time for during the regular week. And then, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock on Sunday, that little tightness that you get in the small of your back, because it's like that Monday morning anxiety is coming. You're not really resting. So embrace just taking time to really rest and not be in the middle of a cycle. And even if you are taking that rest time on the weekend, then that's when you're not doing anything that's going to drain your energy. And if all of that gets to be too much, or you don't have what you feel are appropriate or sufficient coping mechanisms, get professional assistance. EAP is there for a reason. Start talking to someone. There's a lot of telehealth options now. You don't even have to leave the house. It may be stressful to go out, and go to a doctor's office and all that other stuff, but now that kind of comes to you. So like I mentioned, I bake, so I just enjoy doing crafty little things and putting stuff together. So I taught myself how to do a lot of these things. Wow, because we're in quarantine, so this keeps me off the streets, and I'm able to be the creative person that I am, but also balance this out with my day job. So my day job, sometimes when people are, here comes HR, they see you come in, they're like, or you want to have a meeting. It's like, why, what do we need to talk about? And it's like, I'm just talking to you about something. It can be completely innocuous. Totally different with cupcakes. You show up with cupcakes somewhere, people can't wait. People can't wait to see you. So it's the perfect balance for my day job. So I just, have spent a lot of time in my kitchen doing cupcakes. And I had some spare ornaments laying around, so I made a pool noodle wreath, and then I made some for some other friends. So again, I like to get into that space and take that time to do something meditative. Like if I try to meditate, that's going to be a mess. On the flip side of compassion fatigue is what we call compassion satisfaction, which is the pleasure that you get from being able to do your work. And in as much as our jobs are stressful and heavy and whatever sometimes, I can't imagine doing anything else. Like I would not trade my job for anything else. Like I will always be in human resources. It's literally the only thing I know how to do. But when I'm able to help someone out of a situation, or somebody has a baby, or they're getting married, or they need an employment verification because they're buying a house, those are the moments where I'm like, oh, okay, these are fun moments, or we're doing a special event or whatever. There's a lot of satisfaction that comes with the job. It's not all, dark and dreary, but it's also me understanding that balance and trying to find that balance. And, as a Libra, our balance is just very important. So when you see you're getting too far on one end, it's time to kind of recalibrate your scales. So I'm a huge Wonder Woman fan, and I have been since I was little. And she just, in her satin tights, fighting for your rights. That's my Wonder Woman collector's doll next to Uhura, which is another one of my icons because I'm a big fan. We'll talk about that some other time. Yes, I had my nails painted as Wonder Woman, but the point is that, and that's my tree from last Christmas, but she's going to stay in that for forever. Again, don't judge. Just everything that Wonder Woman does is about justice, and it is about helping people and being that. And she's Wonder Woman sometimes, but sometimes she's also just, Diana Prince going to her government job, trying to, finish out her day as best she can. And it's that balance. So finding that, but also, doing what you need to do to perform your job duties well, but also to take care of yourself is kind of the essence of what we need to focus on. So just make sure that you're taking care of yourself. So Jason, I am open for questions.
Sorry about that. I'm trying to find the right screen. We have
Okay.
we have a questions here.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing and try to get back on the camera here. Yes.
So a couple of questions that came in. One is, what is the strategy for addressing compassion fatigue in the context of performance management? Are there specific tools to give managers and supervisors to support employees who are experiencing this type of emotional trauma?
Um, Say that first part for me again. Say that whole thing for me again, I
Yeah.
should say.
What is the strategy for addressing compassion fatigue in the context of performance management? Are there special tools to give managers and supervisors to support employees who are experiencing this type of emotional trauma?
I would say just it really starts with conversation, because the employee may not understand, the employee may not have words for you. You know, they just might say, I'm feeling, you know, fill in the blank, I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling whatever. And it's really incumbent upon us as that person's manager to engage them in a conversation, because what their needs are, it's going to be different for everybody. So when I'm feeling overwhelmed or I'm feeling a certain way, there's a certain, you know, intervention that you're going to use for me. When another employee is feeling a certain way, then there's another intervention that you're going to use for them. It might be something as simple as saying, take the rest of the week off. You know, we'll take care of your, don't worry about it. We'll take care of yourself first, is what I always tell my employees, and we'll take care of it. So it's really, again, about the conversation. It's about the awareness. It's about being responsive when somebody comes to you and says that, because it takes a lot to even verbalize those things sometimes. Like I said, a lot of times people will suffer in silence and just get to the point where they just completely burn themselves out. So listen, 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 listen a lot, and then come up with a collaborative plan. You know, ask that person what they need, and then be there to help them through that process and be a resource for them, versus, you know, old school, it used to be like, hey, that's too bad, get back to work. You know, it's like, we got work to do. But really, we need to be just that much more mindful now of what people are dealing with from an emotional and mental health perspective.
Next question. How does one deal with a manager who may make a judgment call about your ability to cope if you need to step away for a bit? This person speaking about a situation where work product is good, but the boss avoids taking time off and work when and she works when she does take time off. And she says she's a workaholic, but cherish your health and personal life as well.
Um, so if I'm understanding, it's the employee asking about their boss being a workaholic. You know,
Yeah, the employee saying, how do you deal with her boss who may make a judgment call about her ability to cope because the boss just
oh,
works
okay, so the
constantly.
boss is a workaholic, and she expects everybody else to be a workaholic. Is how I'm understanding that. And really, sometimes you have to, what we call manage your manager. You know, that may be that person's coping mechanism. They may be coping by overworking. They may be experiencing the same thing, but instead of taking a step back from work, they're stepping into work. And it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to overwork myself so I don't have to deal with this other stuff here that I'm also experiencing. So it's, what I found is, I'm going to be judged anyway, you know, and that's fine. So, but you really need to, again, advocate for yourself. The expectation that we need to work 50, 60 hours a week as a way of life is, everything that we know tells us that's not effective, that that's not useful. So that person may look at you a little bit differently. But again, it's about having that conversation and saying, you know, I want to be here and be at my best and be the most effective and efficient employee that I can. But I can't do that if I'm working while I'm away. I really need that time away. And so I think sometimes just having that conversation, a lot of times that light bulb will go off, because they also, the manager in that situation might also need to hear that, you know, where it's like, you know, you should be taking a little moment for yourself also, because it's not, I think people think that the more they work, like I said, that's that supply side kind of, you know, approach, where it's like, just work, 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 and then everything will be cool. And that's not how it works. The more you work and tax yourself and exhaust yourself, the less effective you are, the less productive you are, and it starts to really take a toll in your work. So it's really important to have those conversations and to, again, advocate for yourself, but also understand that maybe even the manager is dealing with things that they're not capable of dealing with. And that's the only coping strategy and that they have, is to just continue to work.
Okay, last one. And for anybody on the webinar, if you want to share this webinar, we will have it posted online, cpshr.us/webinars. The last one is, so they have a funeral on Friday for a family member who passed away with COVID. How can I show that I care when I can't take a day off to attend a Zoom funeral?
You can always do outreach. I would reach out beforehand, before the funeral, and say, you know, you have my condolences. I'm sorry that I can't be there, or whatever the situation is, but do something that you're able to do. I had a friend pass away while, you know, during the lockdown, and I could not attend the funeral, and I did want to go. So I just sent, you know, flowers. I sent my condolences to the family and just did something proactive, because it's not, you can't always physically be there, and it's difficult. Even if it is a Zoom meeting, it seems like, oh, okay, well, how come we can't make a Zoom meeting? Again, there's just so much going on right now. There's just, we're all being pulled in so many different directions. But do make a gesture and do some outreach to, you know, show that you are, that you physically can't be there, you can't make the funeral, but that it's still on your mind.
Awesome. Thank you. That's all we have for today. We're at time. Thank you very much, Regina, for this extremely helpful presentation. Hopefully everybody could take a deep breath a little bit. And thank you for everyone that joined us. Be sure to check out our website again, cpshr.us/webinars. I posted the link in the chat for the slide deck and recording. Give me about a day to put it up there, though. And there are also a series of other webinars that are posted. If you're interested in any of them, please register. They are free to attend.
Right. Happy Wonder Woman Wednesday. See you guys next time.
Talk to everyone later. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.